I had just finished my morning coffee when I stepped into the downtown courthouse. The place was buzzing with low murmurs and the steady rhythm of heels on tile. I wasn't scheduled to preside over any cases that day, I was only stopping by to check on a procedural filing. The lobby was crowded, security tense as always, and I kept my badge tucked away. Most days, I preferred to keep a low profile unless I was in the courtroom. But this day would be different, very different. As I moved toward the elevator, a young court officer, broad-shouldered, stiff jaw, and far too eager, blocked my path. "Sir, I need you to back away from that door," he barked without even looking at me properly. I paused. "I'm on official business," I said calmly. He took a step closer, eyes narrowing. "You were told to wait by the side. Do it now." His tone wasn't just commanding. It was confrontational. I reached into my jacket, slowly, to pull out my credentials, the judicial badge that would have clarified everything instantly. But I never got the chance. Without warning, his hand slammed into my chest and shoved me hard against the wall. The thud echoed down the corridor. A few gasps scattered from those watching. Papers dropped. A paralegal screamed. I steadied myself, breath catching in my throat. "You just made a serious mistake," I said, my voice even. The officer scoffed, not even hearing me. "You people always think you can wander around like you own the place," he muttered, grabbing my arm roughly. I glanced at the nearby security camera, then at the crowd slowly backing away, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they didn't see what just happened. And then it began, the shift in energy. One courthouse clerk, an older woman who recognized me, dropped her folder. Her face drained of color. She whispered, "Oh my God, that's Judge Harlan." The air changed. The officer froze for a second, just a second, as the name registered. "Judge who?" he asked, eyes flicking between me and the woman who'd spoken. I stood up straight, brushing off my blazer. "Judge Malcolm Harlan. 9th District Court." His grip loosened instinctively, but it was already too late. The room had shifted from noise to a vacuum. Clerks, attorneys, even 2 deputies across the lobby stood still, watching, unsure if what just happened was real. A man in a charcoal suit hurried over, Jerome, the courthouse director. He recognized me instantly, his face a perfect blend of panic and apology. "Judge Harlan, sir, I had no idea you were coming in today." "You weren't supposed to," I said coldly. The officer looked back and forth, now visibly rattled. "I didn't know. I just thought, you thought I didn't belong here," I interrupted, my voice calm but heavy. "You made a decision. You acted with force. You never once asked for ID." Jerome turned to the officer. "You put your hands on a sitting district judge," he hissed in disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" He wasn't in robes." "He didn't, that's not how this works," Jerome snapped. Suddenly, a voice cut through the room. "Who's in charge of this officer?" It was Chief Court Marshal Tanya Reeves. She had appeared at the edge of the room, drawn by the tension, her presence slicing through the air like a blade. She marched toward us, her boots echoing in the silence, eyes locked on the officer. "Marshal Reeves," I greeted with a small nod. She returned the nod, then turned fully to the officer. "You're done. Hand over your badge. Now." His mouth opened, but no words came out. He reached for the clasp on his uniform with trembling fingers. The courtroom clerk still hadn't moved. You could have heard a pin drop. Because everyone now knew, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was about to become official. The officer slowly removed his badge, the metal catching a glint of light as if even it didn't want to be part of this moment. He placed it into Marshal Reeves' outstretched hand like it was a loaded weapon. No one clapped. No one moved. Reeves turned to the bailiff behind her. "Escort him to the holding area." I want a full incident report on my desk in 20 minutes. Body cam footage. Witness statements. Everything. The bailiff nodded and took the officer by the arm, more out of procedure than restraint. The man didn't resist. He was pale now. Hollow. The kind of silence that follows irreversible mistakes settled over him. I could hear the hushed voices start to trickle back into the room like air returning after a blackout. Someone whispered, "He shoved a judge," another voice, near the elevators, "Not just a judge, Harlan." I turned to Jerome. "I want to see the footage myself. And I want the head of courthouse security in my chambers this afternoon. No delays." "Absolutely, sir," he said quickly, nodding like his life depended on it. As I moved toward the stairs, I didn't feel like waiting for an elevator anymore. I caught sight of a group of junior public defenders watching me like I was a myth that had just walked into real life. Some had that look in their eyes, the silent processing of a system they thought they understood, cracking. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. That came next. Because in less than 15 minutes, I'd be sitting in a conference room reviewing security feeds, listening to audio logs, and making a call to the Chief Justice of the state. Not to protect myself, but to make sure this never happened to anyone else in that building again. The footage played in silence. I sat at the head of the long conference table, elbows resting on the polished oak surface. To my left was Marshal Reeves. Across from me, Jerome, the courthouse director, looked like he hadn't exhaled in 10 straight minutes. The head of security, a gray-haired man named Calhoun, sat stiffly at the end, avoiding my eyes. On the screen, me entering the lobby. The officer stepping into my path. Our exchange. The shove. No hesitation. No reason. No protocol. "Pause it there," I said. The moment froze, my back striking the wall, my arm reflexively rising as if bracing against something more than just physical force. "Play the audio." Reeves tapped her tablet, and the sound came through, tinny but clear. The officer's words were exactly as I remembered. Dismissive. Aggressive. No effort to de-escalate. No question asked. Just assumption followed by action. Calhoun finally spoke. "Judge Harlan. I take full responsibility. This was unacceptable." "Was?" I asked, eyes still on the screen. "It is unacceptable. You have procedures. Guidelines. A chain of identification. Your officer followed none of them. This wasn't just a lapse. It was a pattern, one that was allowed to grow unchecked." Jerome cleared his throat. "Sir, there's never been an incident like this before." "There hasn't been an incident like this with me before," I corrected. "That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. It just means no one's listened." Silence again. Reeves broke it. "Sir, I've already opened a formal internal investigation. We're pulling access logs and reviewing similar complaints going back 3 years. "Good," I said. I turned to Calhoun. "You'll prepare a full list of officers under your supervision who've received disciplinary warnings in the last 12 months. I want it on my desk by the morning." He nodded. "And Jerome," I added, "cancel my leave. I'll be returning to court rotation this week. I want to see for myself how this building operates when it doesn't know who's watching." Jerome paled. Because everyone in that room realized something at the same time, this wasn't just about accountability. It was about what would happen next. By mid-afternoon, word had already spread. Not just across the courthouse, but across the city. Judges talk. Clerks talk faster. And the legal press. They'd heard a whisper and were already circling like sharks. I sat behind my desk, dictating a formal statement that would be submitted to the court administration and made public shortly after. My clerk, a sharp-minded woman named Melissa, typed as I spoke. "Begin with this," I said, eyes focused on the framed certificate of judicial appointment behind her. Earlier today, an incident occurred in the lobby of the 9th District Courthouse involving a court officer and a failure of basic protocol, resulting in the unwarranted physical handling of a sitting judge, myself. Let me be clear, this is not about me as an individual. It is about a broader culture of unchecked assumption and reactive enforcement that cannot continue within the walls of any courthouse in this state. Melissa paused, glancing up at me. You want to add something about your position? No, I said flatly. They already know who I am. That's the problem. She nodded, understanding. I continued. What happened today isn't an isolated failure, it's a warning. A warning that the standards of conduct must be applied universally, regardless of appearance, status, or assumptions made in a moment of power imbalance. To anyone who has ever been dismissed, doubted, or demeaned while seeking justice within these halls, I hear you. And I assure you, starting today, someone in a black robe is finally watching. Melissa stopped typing. The silence between us was heavy, not tense, just full. Then she said softly, "You want me to send this to the press too?" I looked out the window, where the first hint of evening light was casting long shadows over the marble steps below. Yes. Let them read it. Let everyone read it. Because this story wasn't going to be buried. It was about to go everywhere. By the time the statement hit the press, it was already too late for spin. Every major local outlet ran the story by evening. District judge mistaken for civilian, physically shoved by court officer inside courthouse, Judge Harlan releases powerful statement following courthouse incident, questions rise over courthouse protocols after senior judge allegedly mishandled. They used words like, mishandled, mistaken identity, and, inappropriate force. But the public used different ones. The city's legal community, prosecutors, defense attorneys, court staff, began flooding inboxes with questions, apologies, and quiet admissions. I've seen things like this before. I thought it would never happen to someone that high up. This could have been me. And then came the phone calls. One from the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. Another from the Governor's office. Then the State Bar Association. They weren't just checking in. They were worried. Worried because it wasn't just a story about a mistake anymore, it was becoming a symbol of deeper flaws. Of silent experiences. Of voices no one had believed until now. And I stayed quiet that evening. I watched the coverage, but I didn't comment further. Because the time for talking was over. The next day, I was scheduled to preside over a high-profile civil rights trial, one involving courthouse mistreatment. Irony? No. Timing. And when I walked into that courtroom in full robe, no security escort, no nameplate, no announcements, every head turned. People stood. Not just out of respect. But because, for the first time in a long time, they finally saw me clearly. The courtroom was packed. Not with reporters. They were banned from this session, but with people. Clerks on break, junior attorneys who had never stepped into my courtroom before, even courthouse maintenance staff in the back corner pretending to check the ventilation system. They were all here for one reason, to witness what came after. The bailiff announced the session. All rise. But they were already standing. I walked in slowly, robe flowing, expression unreadable. My presence carried weight now, not just judicial authority, but something heavier. Something earned through fire, not title. I took my seat. Be seated, I said, and the entire room seemed to settle into a collective breath. The case was a civil claim, a courthouse visitor alleging she was wrongfully searched and removed from the building by a different officer weeks ago. Normally, this would have been a dry procedural hearing. But not today. The defense counsel looked nervous. He kept fidgeting with his pen, eyes darting up at me like I might explode. The plaintiff's attorney, a young woman with fierce posture and a soft voice, met my gaze directly. She didn't blink. After opening arguments, I leaned forward and addressed both parties. I will remind this court, I said evenly, that the issue before us is not just about one interaction, one hallway, or one officer. It is about whether a person's rights were dismissed before they were ever acknowledged. The room was still. I turned to the officer named in the complaint, seated at the defense table. I know what it feels like to have your identity overlooked, I said. To be physically forced into a corner where words no longer matter. So today, the court will listen. Fully. He lowered his head. Even his lawyer had no response. The hearing continued for the next hour, quiet, intense, surgical. Every question from me cut closer to the real problem. The courthouse, the culture, the quiet permission given to unchecked behavior. Because now they knew, I wasn't just going to hand down verdicts. I was going to rebuild the standard. By noon, the courthouse halls had turned into murmuring rivers of reaction. The bailiff said he hadn't seen a hearing like that in over a decade. Attorneys were whispering in break rooms about what they'd witnessed, not just a trial, but a recalibration of how power moved inside that building. After the session, I returned to chambers and found a sealed envelope on my desk. It was from the Office of Internal Affairs. I opened it slowly. Inside, a formal request for my cooperation in a sweeping investigation of courthouse conduct over the past 5 years. And beneath it, a handwritten note from the director himself, "Your experience opened the door. We're prepared to walk through it. If you're willing." I sat back and took a breath. Just then, Melissa buzzed in from the outer office. "Judge, there's someone here to see you. Says he's from the governor's office. Says it's urgent." I stood. "Send him in." A tall, well-dressed man entered, holding a folder. He introduced himself quickly and got to the point even faster. "The governor is preparing to make a statement this evening. She's offering full support for a judiciary-led commission on courthouse integrity, and she wants you to chair it." I blinked. "You're serious?" "Completely. You've already got the public's attention. But this would give you the power to fix more than just your courtroom." It was tempting. More than that, it was necessary. I looked down at the folder. Inside was the framework, investigative authority, budget lines, and appointment powers. The foundation for something lasting. "I'll do it," I said. "But on one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "That officer who shoved me. I want to see him again, not to punish him, but to face him. In front of the people he once thought he could treat that way." The man nodded slowly. "I think that can be arranged." And as he left, I realized. This wasn't about a courtroom anymore. This was about the system. And I was no longer just a judge. I was about to become its reformer. The auditorium was full. Court staff, local officials, community leaders, and everyday citizens filled the seats. The governor's announcement had drawn attention far beyond the legal world. News cameras were barred, but that didn't stop the buzz. Everyone knew something was about to shift. On stage, a long table was set up for the new commission. I sat in the center seat. No robe. Just a dark suit, quiet power. To my left, the Director of Internal Affairs. To my right, the governor herself. But all eyes weren't on us. They were on the man being led through the side door. The former officer. He wore a plain suit now, no badge, no uniform. Just the weight of what he'd done. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then landed on me. He walked forward slowly, guided by a staffer, and was offered a seat on the small platform below us. A low murmur rippled through the room. I leaned forward. "Mr. Reddick," I said calmly, "this is your opportunity to speak." He swallowed hard. A second passed. Then another. "I was wrong," he said finally, voice thin. "I thought I was doing my job, but I never asked who I was talking to." I saw a man in a hallway and made a decision, one I've made before. Only this time, it was the wrong person. A person with a title. No, I said. That's not why this matters. He looked up, confused. This matters because it shouldn't have to be someone with a title for people to be treated with basic respect, I continued. You didn't fail me, you failed the position you were entrusted with. You failed the oath. The room was silent. People leaned in. I'm not here to humiliate you, I said. I'm here to make sure the system that let you believe that behavior was acceptable, ends today. He nodded. And in that nod was something heavier than shame. It was recognition. A quiet reckoning. The governor stepped forward and announced the formation of the Courthouse Conduct Oversight Commission, with full investigatory power statewide. Applause followed, but I didn't smile. This wasn't a celebration. It was a start. One that came not from speeches, but from one violent shove. Weeks passed. The commission got to work fast. We reviewed decades of disciplinary records, reopened quietly buried complaints, and interviewed dozens of staff who had long been afraid to speak. What surfaced wasn't surprising, but it was sobering. Patterns. Excuses. And an unspoken rule that power often walked hand in hand with presumption. But now, the tide was turning. One courthouse updated its entry protocols within days of our first report. Another implemented bias response simulations and mandatory annual retraining. And in 3 jurisdictions, officers previously shielded by silence were quietly removed. What made the biggest impact wasn't just policy. It was visibility. Because I kept showing up. Unannounced. Unrobed. Sometimes just standing in a corner of a hallway to see who still followed the old habits when they thought no one important was watching. They all knew now, respect was not negotiable. Dignity was not conditional. And status could no longer be measured by skin or suit. Then one afternoon, months later, I returned to the same courthouse lobby where it all began. Same tile floor. Same echo. Different atmosphere. A young officer at the checkpoint, new face, fresh eyes, noticed me approaching. No robe. No escort. He stepped forward. Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you with anything? He asked, polite, alert, and professional. I nodded and pulled out my badge slowly, more from habit than necessity. He glanced at it, eyes widening, but his tone didn't change. Welcome back, Judge Harlan. Let me know if you need anything today. I smiled for the first time in that building in a long while. Thank you, I said simply. You're doing it right. And I walked through the doors. Because justice doesn't always begin in the courtroom. Sometimes, it begins in the hall. With a choice. With a pause. With one person brave enough to say, this isn't how we do things anymore. 6 months later, the ripple effects were undeniable. Across the state, complaints of courthouse misconduct dropped by nearly 40%. Officers were now required to complete biannual certification that included not only tactical procedures but behavioral accountability training, and for the first time in state history, judges had a say in that curriculum. It wasn't just policy. It was culture. And the public felt it too. Court appearances once feared by everyday citizens became less intimidating. People walked into buildings like they belonged, because now, they knew someone inside was watching out for them. One day, I received a letter. It was handwritten, neat, and simple. No return address. Dear Judge Harlan, I don't know you personally, but I saw the story. I'm just a clerk. Been one for 17 years. I've seen things happen here that I couldn't stop. And then you got shoved. I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm not sorry for what came after. The building feels different now. Better. Lighter. Like someone turned the lights on and we're not pretending anymore. Thank you, TL. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in the back of my law book, where I keep the things that matter most. The public thought the story was about a judge being assaulted. But those of us inside knew the truth. It was about how long silence had been allowed to rule. And how fast it fell once someone stood still and said, "Not anymore." The legacy wasn't mine. It belonged to everyone who decided to see, to speak, and to change. And that courthouse. It didn't need a statue. It had a standard now. 1 year to the day after the incident, a ceremony was held at the Capitol Courthouse, the oldest and most prestigious in the state. It wasn't a celebration. It was a recommitment. Court officers, marshals, clerks, attorneys, and judges gathered not just for speeches, but to take part in something that hadn't been done in over 80 years, the rewriting of the official courthouse oath of service. This time, I was invited to deliver the opening. Not as the judge who'd been shoved. Not as the head of the Reform Commission. But as a peer, one who had walked the same halls, felt the same heat, and stayed standing when others looked away. I stepped up to the podium. No robe. Just truth. When you swear an oath to serve the court, I said, you are not swearing allegiance to a building. You are swearing it to the people who walk through its doors, regardless of their title, clothes, or skin. I looked across the room. So many familiar faces. So many who had stayed silent, and so many who no longer would. This oath is not about protection. It's about recognition. Not about rank, but responsibility. And it begins not when someone enters a courtroom, but the moment they enter the hallway. Then I read the new words aloud. I swear to uphold the dignity, safety, and fair treatment of every individual who steps within these walls, to recognize humanity before authority, and justice before judgment, and to serve with integrity, vigilance, and humility, from the doors, to the bench. One by one, voices joined me. Officers repeated it. Clerks repeated it. Even judges did. No applause followed. Just a silence, deep, firm, and earned. And in that silence, I realized, justice had never needed a louder voice. It had needed a steadier one. And finally, it had one.